Hello again, and welcome to another theory breakdown. Now, this particular topic I've talked about in many of my videos, including the Claude Monet one that came out recently. Now, this happens a lot because I talk about a lot of impressionistic artists, and color variation is one of the primary fundamentals in creating that impressionistic look. Now, I wanted to really delve deeper into what is color variation and when do you really use it? And why do you even use it in the first place? So, we have to understand that reality never has large masses of consistent color. When you look around you, look at nature as well, you'll find that unless you're looking at an artificial piece of plastic that's in front of you, chances are there are a lot of things in life, plants, um, even your skin, that will have a lot of variations of colors within them. You're not looking to paint one flat piece of color because it's never going to exist in reality, barring artificial means. So it is imperative to really spice things up when it comes to comes to your work rather. You want to break up your masses. Now, you can do this in a variety of ways. I have a ton of artwork that I'll be analyzing, but it it is something that you have to think about. And when you look at your own work and see that perhaps there are some things that are looking a little bit static, unnatural, maybe it's time to bring some new color into your masses. Even though if it's random, um, something, just anything to break it down. So what colors you use depends on the context, of course, your style, and what you're painting texturally. So, for instance, if you're painting rustic metal, that'll be more of the bluish with browns going on. But if you're painting green plants and stuff, perhaps you want to avoid those particular colors unless there are other sources to emit that color from outside. Of course, that's obviously on your context and what you need in your style. A lot of my artwork that I'll be analyzing will have a variety of different styles, which allows you to note how these artists are creating color variation. And of course, composition always matters. It's not about trying to create the perfect realism in most cases and most styles. You are trying to fix your picture. And color variation is a fantastic way of distributing some colors that you need in certain areas in a natural way without making it look too contrived or introducing a new element or object in your piece. So just having random brushstrokes of texture will be a good excuse to distribute colors. But of course, it has to be logical to some degree. So again, if you are trying to create a green plant, having a very stark, very saturated red on top of it, unless there was blood spilled on top of it, perhaps you might want to avoid that. Maybe just have it a bit more subtle reds going on, or just having, in general, just having a little bit more nuance when it comes to that. Let's avoid crazy variations of colors. You don't need them. In a lot of cases, you can just shift the saturations a bit, shift the hues a bit, and you could have some really nice textures. Now, of course, let's look into some artwork. Can't go wrong with looking at some Claude Monet impressionism, and sorry, a lot of cases you will study impressionistic artwork to understand the idea of color variation. So, if we were to zoom out here, you might see that the piece feels like there's certain masses, just very static masses of colors. But as we zoom in, you realize that there are so many things going on, and he even exaggerates a lot of it. So, of course, note that, for instance, the reflection here is beautiful, actually. One of my favorite parts of this painting. Notice how there's variations of saturations here. There's a bit of greens going on here if you look very carefully. And of course, look at this red in contrast to the brownish reflection of her hair. And you can see it over here as well. Just a lot of colors going on. Beautiful. It's unified. Very cheap way, actually, to distribute some of that green into the reflection over here to create some variation and to balance the composition. Now, of course, won't go too far with it, but notice how the water is very, very nice here. There's so many colors going on. Just in a way, it's like having a war of colors here. Blues with browns and oranges, but it just feels like it makes sense. This is much harder than it looks, honestly. To be able to pick these colors, to be able to just know just how much of each color you need in order to create variation without making it look too overpowering on any end. And it looks very natural, despite the fact that this is a very impressionistic piece. Always study Claude Monet. Trust me, you'll learn a lot from just looking at his work for like 5 minutes. Now let's look into the concept art world. This is Daniel Docio. And same fundamentals, just much more rendered, obviously, for video games and for movies type of thing. One particular area I wanted you to look at is just how nicely rendered this, I guess you could say, rock formation. Very fossilized. You could even say it's like very metallic. But anyways, look how much variations there are when it comes to this mass. But we can even ignore these reflections of rock formations here. Notice how you kind of get a really nice chroma feeling here with some blues here, with some oranges, of varied saturation rather, and that's the primary area. But you can even look at here. Now, of course, he has more excuses when it comes to just amalgamations of constructs, but notice how it's still, there's greens here, there's oranges here, just a lot of things going on, not just one mass here, there's textures here. Look how this green area here, this greenish gray here is broken down by the orange grays here. Just fantastic use of textures here. It's just masterfully done, and of course we can look into the rock formation on the back here as well. Very nice. There's a lot of things going on. Look at this gray here compared to the other oranges here, but it's distributed properly, so it creates that really nice texture going on. Now, one thing to note is you'll find this a lot in other people's work as well. As it goes into the background, there's less color variations, or less stark color variations. There are still things to break it down, but in a lot of cases, when you have foreground elements, it pops out a lot more when you have a lot of color variations going on compared to the background here. Of course, we want to push the backgrounds to the back, which again is done by texture with Daniel Docio's work. I'm going to keep moving on before I drag on too late. Ghibli work. Ghibli is actually one of the studios that really push this color variation, this impressionistic style to an animation world. I want one key thing to note is the roof of this house. Notice how there are blues here. This is logical because we are conditioned in this piece to have blues from the sky hit the roof. He didn't need to, whoever worked on this, I wouldn't say just Miyazaki, the artists working on this didn't need to put a ton of blues to signify that the sky is emitting light. It just needs a little bit of brushstrokes here and there. Of course, this roof still has to look like it's red, so even when we zoom back outwards, this roof is for sure red. That's one thing to note. No matter what you use for color variations, you do not want to break the color identity of what you need. So this is still a red roof despite the fact there are blues in here. Now if I were to make this a much bigger mass, let's just exaggerate it. Let's just say I want to add blues and I just add a ton of blues. Then it kind of just breaks the idea of color variation and it just turns the entire roof into a different color impression. Of course, we can look into the trees as well. Fantastic. There's areas of red, distributing some of that red up the roof up here, so there's an excuse for it. And one key thing to note is, of course, when it comes to animation, animated areas, very hard to create color variations because you have to paint so many frames. So in Ghibli's case, the animation is more simplistic in comparison to the backgrounds, which makes it stand out. A lot of cases you might find that it's reversed, especially for illustration, but for animation you'll find a lot of people have very complex backgrounds with very simplified animation. Let's look into more fine art. So this is Jeremy Lipking. Skin tone is a very, very good excuse to introduce a lot of color variations. A lot of people make the mistake of painting skin as if it's one color, but if you want any semblance of realism, there are a lot of nuances going on, and even stuff that I can't even break down because I'm not skilled enough compared to somebody like Jeremy Lipking. Notice how, look at these blues here. Oh, let's use a different color. Speaking of which, lots of blue purples here. Look at this area as well. Very nice here. And there's, of course, the cheek bones here have more red in comparison to the forehead, which is more yellowish and blues. And of course, we can look into the hair as well. Just sparkles of purple here. Just break up the mass. It doesn't have to be just a dark beard or a dark piece of mass of the hair. Look how there's greens in here too, browns just juggling around here. Very, very nice. And of course, as we similar to the Ghibli and similar to Daniel Dolcio's work, as it gets into places where you want to push back a bit, stuff that you don't want people to get distracted by, notice how much more simple the clothing is. Didn't need to render with a ton of detail, it just needs to give the impression of the clothing. No need to introduce a ton of color variations over here in order to make it so the face stands out. Let's look into another portrait here. David Cassin. This is actually a zoomed in image of the actual artwork, but I just wanted to drive home the point that there are so many colors going on in realism. Look how many. I'm not gonna go too deep into it. I'm sure you get the point. Look at this brown, not brown. What we're talking about, aqua-ish gray. Notice how many areas it is encompassing and very being put into the skin. This is a great way of incorporating something that seems like it's very contrasting with skin tone in order to make it so that the person looks like it's part of the environment. Distributing colors while creating texture for your skin tone, and it's very beautiful. Look into David Cassin's work. Deceptively masterful. Now let's look into more simplified portraiture. This is Michael Carson. Now, even though this is a very stylized portrait, you still see there are very nice nuances going on with this red. Now, of course, because he wanted to drive home the point that this is a very red mass, he doesn't really deviate too much when it comes to the color variation. but there are still variations of colors, and there are little things going on to break up the mass, especially when it comes to value here. But there are little tones of saturation. It's very hard to see, particularly if you're looking at it from a video, but there are saturation differences when it comes to the reds, which creates variation. And of course, there's hue variation over here as well. Very, very nice. And it goes without saying, no matter which artist you're looking at, when you are trying to create a sense of realism, you'll notice that these people will always have color variation. Now I want to finish off with something more of a photography. You could say there's manipulation, photo manipulation with this as well. I want to drive home the point that despite the fact that this looks like a very blue piece, despite the fact that it feels very monotone, there are a lot of nuances going on. The sky has a lot of reds. You can see there's a strand of green as it goes down into the areas in the city. There are reds here, very hard to see. There are tones of reds on these buildings. It's very subtle. Just mix a little bit of colors. It might seem random, but of course it's a photograph. But just having little bits of variation in your work, in masses, it sort of like wiggles your eyes. It's like there's a big difference if I were to just paint this in a monotone way. Now that's exaggerated, of course, but imagine if that's the case. Actually, no. Let's make it. Let's just do it like this. I am just bringing the same hue for the rest of the piece here, instead of having color variation. So you notice there are differences. So this is the original, and this is where I'm painted. So notice how it makes a difference. The variations of colors make a difference. And again, you could start off being random about it. It doesn't matter. Just be aware of this fundamental and just really incorporate it in your work as soon as possible. Trust me, it is something that is worth really mastering, because your work will level up if you understand this fundamental. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time.